Think about the grammar rules you agonize over in high school language classes. The endless verb conjugations.
Oh, the gendered noun.
Right. The gender downs, the sheer terror of putting a modifier in the wrong place. But what if I told you those rigid rules were never actually meant to help you speak?
Which is wild to think about.
It is. What if they were invented thousands of years ago just to keep ancient accountants' records neat?
I mean, it completely flips the script on how we approach learning. We treat foreign languages as these impenetrable fortresses guarded by grammar police,
Yeah?
when historically spoken language was wildly flexible, cooperative, and frankly, a bit chaotic.
Which is exactly why, for anyone listening to this deep dive right now, whether you're trying to pick up conversational Spanish for an upcoming trip, or you're just, intensely curious about how the human brain actually communicates, the traditional method feels like trying to climb a mountain while wearing a street jacket.
Right, it's frustrating.
You know the drill. You're staring at flashcards,
Mhm.
memorizing conjugation tables, trying to just brute force foreign vocabulary into your head.
And that brute force method is often entirely counterproductive. So, today we are looking at the factual insights from Frederick Bodmer's seminal 1944 work, The Loom of Language.
An absolute classic.
Yeah. And the mission here is to fundamentally shortcut that daunting task of language acquisition. We're going to trace how human communication evolved from primitive hunting signals all the way to the alphabet,
Right.
and explore how recognizing hidden language families acts as essentially the ultimate cheat code.
Bodmer's whole approach hinges on becoming what he calls language conscious, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's about stepping back and looking at the underlying machinery of it all.
Exactly. You have to see the historical threads that connect diverse cultures. When you realize why a language behaves the way it does, those seemingly arbitrary, frustrating rules suddenly start to make perfect logical sense.
Well, we should probably start this journey at the actual bedrock of human knowledge,
Yeah.
which is writing. And to understand the mechanics of writing, we have to look at the problem our ancestors were trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Because, spoken language is an incredibly unstable medium.
Oh, incredibly.
Slang develops overnight, accents drift, and pronunciations change so rapidly that a few generations apart, people can barely understand each other.
Right, and writing solves that stability problem. It locks meaning into place, preserving ideas across millennia, even as the spoken version of the language mutates. But getting to our modern alphabet was a massive cognitive leap.
Yeah.
Early on, writing was purely pictorial. You draw a picture of a sun to mean day or sun.
Yeah.
You draw a foot to mean walk.
Okay, let's unpack this. So pictorial writing is basically like using emojis to tell a story.
Exactly.
But the limitation there is pretty obvious. Like, how do you draw an emoji for a complex abstract concept like loyalty or tomorrow?
You can't.
Right, you'd end up needing thousands of different incredibly intricate symbols.
Which meant that under a pictorial system, reading and writing had to be the exclusive domain of a highly privileged elite. Only scribes, priests, and royalty had the decades of free time required to memorize thousands of complex pictograms.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the breakthrough that changed humanity was phonetic writing, moving away from drawing the meaning of a word and instead drawing the sound of the word.
So it's like handing someone a small box of Lego bricks that can be rearranged to build literally any word in the universe.
It's a great analogy.
Suddenly, you don't need 1,000 symbols, you just need a couple of dozen.
And when you connect that emoji to Lego shift to the broader historical context, you realize this wasn't just a technical upgrade in record keeping. It was a profound social revolution.
How so?
The alphabet democratized literacy. A phonetic system utilizing just 20 or 30 symbols can be taught to the broader public, effectively breaking the elite's monopoly on knowledge.
That is amazing. And the sources trace the emergence of modern alphabets back roughly 3,000 years to a common source. But how did we actually make that leap from syllables to single letters? Because I just can't imagine a group of ancient scholars sitting down and, inventing the letter B.
No, it happened organically, and it was heavily influenced by the structural quirks of Semitic languages.
Okay.
Semitic languages operate on a fascinating system built around 3 consonant roots. The core meaning of a concept is carried entirely by the consonants.
Wait, really? So they essentially stripped all the vowels out of the written word. How does anyone even read that?
Well, think of the consonant root as the core melody in a jazz song.
Okay.
The vowels are just the different instruments playing variations around that central melody. For example, in Arabic, the root KTB carries the core concept of writing. Add different vowels in speech and you get katab for you wrote, katab for book, or katib for writer.
Oh, wow.
Because the core meaning was anchored in those consonants, early writers realized they only needed to write the consonants down for the reader to understand the melody of the sentence.
So that structural quirk essentially forced the invention of the very first consonant-only alphabets.
Yes, it was the necessary bridge. Later, the Greeks adopted this system, but because their language wasn't built on those consonant roots, they repurposed some of the leftover Semitic symbols to represent vowels.
Which gave us the full alphabet.
Exactly. That fusion gave us the vowel-inclusive systems that formed the basis of the modern alphabets you and I use today.
Which honestly raises a massive glaring contradiction.
No.
If phonetic writing was supposed to be this perfectly efficient Lego system where one block equals one sound, why is spelling in a language like English such an absolute nightmare?
Oh, English spelling.
I mean, we have words like night spelled with a K, an N, a G, and an H. That is not an efficient phonetic system.
No, it's not. This is where historical events violently crash into linguistic evolution. Spelling often diverges from phonetic reality because written records get frozen in time, while spoken language keeps running forward. And a prime mechanism for this is conquest.
Ah, like the Norman conquest of 1066.
Spot on. The French-speaking Normans took over England, and suddenly you have French scribes trying to record Old English, which is a Germanic language with heavy guttural sounds that didn't even exist in French.
Right.
So the scribes just improvised. They mashed French phonetic rules onto English words. Then the printing press came along centuries later and permanently standardized those bizarre spellings.
So it was freezing the typos in amber.
Basically. Meanwhile, the actual spoken pronunciation of English kept evolving for another 1,000 years. People stopped pronouncing the K and the GH in night, but the spelling was already locked in.
So we're essentially navigating a defective mapping system today.
We really are.
And the sources point out that because these historical, clunky scripts can heavily hinder global communication, there have long been calls for an international standard based on the Roman alphabet.
Yes.
Kind of a compromise to balance incredible linguistic diversity with a desperate need for simplification.
Right. A standardized script aims to remove the initial friction of cross-cultural communication.
So we have the Lego bricks,
Yeah.
the alphabet. But how did our ancestors actually start snapping them together? This transitions us to what Bodmer calls accidents, or the table manners of language.
I love that phrase, table manners.
It's perfect. Let's look at the evolution of early speech.
Well, the earliest records of writing we have are quite young compared to the actual dawn of human speech. Early civilizations usually utilized their first writing systems to document celestial visitors, astronomical events, or royal lineages.
So we basically have to reverse engineer early spoken language.
We do. And Bodmer lays out that primitive language wasn't philosophical at all. It was intensely cooperative.
Because it was driven by sheer survival.
Exactly. You have a team of early humans trying to hunt a mammoth or build a shelter. They needed to coordinate. So he categorizes this early cooperative speech into 4 functional groups.
Okay, what are they?
First, substantives, which are distinct sounds for specific objects or qualities. The mammoth, the fire.
Makes sense.
Then vocatives, which act as signals to elicit an immediate response. Come, help, stop.
Right.
Third are demonstratives, serving as vocal pointers or gestures. Here, there, that. And lastly, incorporatives.
Incorporatives.
Yeah, these were rhythmic sound combinations used in communal rituals before structured syntax fully emerged.
So it's purely functional, like big animal. Here, stop.
Yes.
But this brings us back to the bomb you dropped at the very beginning of this deep dive. Bodmer explicitly states that grammar did not evolve from humans naturally wanting to speak better.
No, it didn't.
Grammar was born from the demands of written language.
Because spoken speech relies heavily on context, tone, and physical gestures. If I point at a mammoth and shout, you know exactly what I mean. But writing removes the physical context. The reader isn't there to see what you're pointing at. As early societies grew and needed to keep track of grain silos, taxes, and historical treaties, they had to invent rigid structures grammar to ensure the written records were unambiguous and neat.
Wait, if grammar was essentially invented just to keep ancient written records neat, why do we torture modern language learners with complex rules before they can even order a cup of coffee?
It is the great irony of language education. Bodmer argues that learning grammar first is like trying to memorize every single traffic law and zoning regulation of a foreign city without even knowing where the grocery store is or what the streets look like.
You don't need to know the penalty for an illegal U-turn if you don't even have a basic map.
Exactly. Furthermore, when you study the broad arc of language evolution, you see that languages naturally trend towards simplification over long periods. Consider the concept of flexion.
Flexion, like how words alter their forms to show tense, person, or case.
Right. The classic example being Latin.
Oh, Latin.
Latin and ancient Greek operated on incredibly complex, heavy systems of flexion. The end of a word changed constantly depending on its role in the sentence. But over centuries, as English evolved, it shed almost all of those flexions and gender assignments. It favored simpler expressions.
So in English, adjectives modify nouns without changing their own structure to match a gender or a case.
Right. And for the listener, grasping the basic, essential map of a language must precede agonizing over the complex rules.
Which pulls us from the table manners of language right into the traffic rules, which is syntax,
Yeah.
how those manners actually function out on the open road.
Or, more accurately, how those rules constantly break down in the wild.
Right.
Traditional parts of speech, strictly boxing words into nouns, verbs, and adjectives, offer surprisingly little insight into actual meaning. Real-world language is governed almost entirely by context.
And English syntax is incredibly flexible. The source provides the example of newspaper headlines, where words constantly jump categories to save space.
Oh, I love this example.
You see a headline like giant bat bats bat.
Yeah.
The exact same sequence of letters is acting first as an adjective, then a noun, then a verb, then a noun. The context of the surrounding words is doing literally all the heavy lifting.
And relying purely on traditional grammatical markers leads learners straight into what Bodmer calls the anarchy of words.
The anarchy of words. That sounds like a brilliant title for a punk rock album, but it is a miserable phenomenon to experience when you are trying to become fluent in French or German.
It really is. The anarchy refers to the dangerous assumption that if you find an English word in a dictionary, its foreign equivalent will map perfectly and function in the exact same way.
And they rarely do.
Almost never. We see this most aggressively with tiny little words, particles and prepositions.
Oh man, prepositions.
They are the ultimate anarchists of language. In English, you say you are on the train. In other languages, you might be in the train. You might be angry at someone in English, but angry with or against them elsewhere.
So trying to translate particles and prepositions word for word is basically like trying to plug an American appliance into a European outlet without an adapter.
Yes.
It might look like the same kind of electricity, but the context is totally wrong and it's going to short circuit.
And that short circuit leaves the learner feeling totally paralyzed. This is why Bodmer insists that true fluency requires observing how words behave in their natural habitat. Idiomatic expressions carry the lifeblood of a language, and they just defy one-to-one translation.
Okay, let's take a breath and figure out the solution here. Because word-for-word translation is a trap. Grammar rules are basically ancient accounting methods.
Right.
Spoken language is full of anarchy. So how are you actually supposed to decode a foreign language without completely losing your mind?
By looking at its family tree. This is the linguistic cheat code.
Yeah.
When you recognize the hidden structural patterns that connect languages, the learning curve drops dramatically.
How did we even figure out these language families existed? I just imagined, like, linguists huddled over ancient manuscripts.
Actually, the initial discoveries came from a much more practical place. It was sailors, merchants, and soldiers.
Really?
Yeah, they were traveling the ports of Europe and couldn't help but notice the undeniable practical links between Dutch, German, and Danish. Meanwhile, the French were spotting massive overlaps among Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian.
So it was a street-level observation.
Totally.
But when did it transition into formal study? Like, why weren't academics looking at this earlier?
Well, for centuries, academia was obsessed almost exclusively with Latin and Greek. The languages of the common people were considered beneath serious study.
Wow.
The catalyst for change was the period following the French Revolution, coupled with a massive push by Christian missionaries to translate scriptures into the vernacular, the languages people actually spoke.
Ah, so that forced scholars to finally look at the structure of common languages.
Exactly. Pioneers like Joseph Justus Scaliger, Leibniz, Lorenzo Hervas, and Franz Bopp developed the comparative method. They didn't look at modern slang, they looked for cognates, words that sound similar and share meaning across different languages, specifically within the most ancient, foundational vocabulary.
Like personal pronouns, basic verbs. Family member, you look at father in English, father in German, padre in Spanish, pater in Latin.
Yes. And through those foundational cognates, they mapped out the Indo-European family, which is staggering in its size. It encompasses the Teutonic branch, the Romance languages, the Slavonic tongues.
Right.
But they also mapped entirely distinct families outside of that, like the Finno-Ugrian, Semitic, and Bantu families, each operating on totally different structural logic.
And the sources show that languages generally fall into three primary structural types.
Hmm.
Knowing which type you are dealing with seems crucial before you start trying to learn it.
It acts as your architectural blueprint. So first you have isolating languages, such as Chinese. In an isolating language, the words themselves never change form. There are no conjugations or plural endings.
So the grammar is dictated almost entirely by the strict order of the words in the sentence.
Exactly. Second is agglutinating languages. Finnish is the classic example here.
Agglutinating.
Yeah, these languages build meaning by sticking grammatical components together sequentially, almost like coupling train cars.
Oh, train cars.
So in English, you might say, in my houses, 3 separate words. In an agglutinating language, you take the root word for house, attach a specific suffix for plural, attach another clear suffix for in, and another for my, forming one long, highly structured word.
Got it. And the third type.
Amalgamating languages, like Latin or ancient Greek, instead of neatly coupling distinct train cars, the root word itself undergoes complex, irregular internal changes to convey grammar. The derivations and meanings are tightly fused together and can't be easily separated.
It also comes down to the phonetic fingerprint of the family, right? The sources note that Aryan languages lean heavily on dense consonant clusters, while Bantu languages utilize an intricate system of noun classes and prefixes that dictate a totally unique rhythm and sound structure.
Yes. And by identifying the family and the structural type, you massively reduce your cognitive load. You realize you aren't learning an entirely alien system from scratch. You are just learning how a new branch of a familiar tree grows.
Here's where it gets really interesting for the listener. If you know the Spanish word for to eat comer, you instantly have a leg up on the Italian manger and the French manger. Are we basically just learning different dialects of a massive ancient master language?
In a way, yes, it demystifies the entire endeavor. By recognizing these language families, you turn seemingly random foreign words into predictable, familiar patterns.
Which brings us to the master strategy. We've mapped out the history, the evolution of the alphabet, the pitfalls of grammar, and the vast linguistic family tree. How do we distill all this high-level theory into Bodmer's practical, actionable strategy that you can use to learn a language today?
It requires a fundamental shift in mindset. The biggest obstacle to learning a new language isn't a bad memory or a lack of talent.
No.
No, the trap is focusing on the distant, abstract goal of perfect fluency rather than the immediate functional material right in front of you.
So we have to become language conscious, engaging with the elements of a language, rather than just blindly memorizing long lists of nouns.
Yes. Bodmer's golden rule is surprisingly narrow. He argues that learners must focus their initial energy almost entirely on a highly specific, small class of words.
What exactly are we focusing on?
Particles, pronouns, pointer words, conjunctions, and helper verbs.
So skip the nouns, skip the action verbs.
For the first phase, yes. The vast majority of our everyday language interactions are built upon a core list of just about 150 of these essential words.
Wait, really? Just 150?
Just about 150. Words like however, through, mine, would, because, under.
So what does this all mean for you? It means you can officially stop feeling guilty about forgetting your flashcards for random zoo animals, colors, or items of clothing. The secret is focusing entirely on the linguistic glue.
The scaffolding of communication. Remember the anarchy of words we discussed with prepositions? Those 150 glue words are the hardest to translate word for word, but they are the absolute most critical to master.
Because imagine you are navigating a train station in Tokyo. Even if you know the Japanese noun for train and the noun for airport, if you don't understand the pointer words for to, from, before, or after, you are completely helpless.
Exactly. But once you have mastered that glue, the syntax, the core particles, the pointer words, and you understand the broader family tree of the language, plugging the actual nouns and verbs into that scaffolding later becomes effortless.
You learn how to frame and build the house first. You could always buy the furniture, the nouns later.
Precisely. You master the framework, you learn the 150 essential words that hold it together, And the impossible mountain of language learning turns into a very manageable, logical path.
It is an incredibly empowering shift in perspective. Let's briefly trace the causal chain of what we've uncovered today for the listener. We started by seeing how this shift from pictorial emojis to phonetic Lego bricks democratized literacy, fundamentally altering human history.
Right.
We realized that this sudden explosion of written records is what forced the invention of rigid grammar rules meant for ancient accountants, not for natural cooperative speech.
And we examined the flexible, context-heavy traffic rules of syntax, uncovering how word-for-word translation causes massive short circuit.
We explored how linguistic pioneers mapped the language family trees by looking at foundational cognates, revealing the hidden structural types that act as a learner's cheat code.
And we landed on the master strategy, bypassing the endless noun memorization to focus purely on the 150-word scaffolding, the linguistic glue that truly holds everyday communication together.
Because language, at its very core, evolved strictly as a cooperative tool for human connection. It wasn't born in a classroom. It was born from our primal need to look at another human and say, help me, look here, work with me.
Which is beautiful, really.
It is, but that leaves us with a fascinating, somewhat provocative thought to mull over. The source material proves that language is the ultimate cooperative tool. But look at the world we live in right now. We increasingly rely on the AI in our pockets to instantly translate everything for us.
Yeah, that's true.
You just hold up a phone, it listens, and it spits out the foreign language. It removes all the friction.
It fundamentally alters the dynamic of human interaction.
Right, so the question is, as technology strips away the friction of translation, will we eventually lose the need to learn these underlying table manners and traffic rules of language? Or will understanding the loom of language, that master blueprint of how we structure our thoughts and history, become the exact thing that ensures we are still truly connecting with each other as human beings, rather than just acting as passive data processors?
It is a profound question about the future of how we relate to one another.
Something to think about the next time you hear a foreign language spoken on the street or fire up a translation app. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.